So we're continuing on with the story of Abraham here, and we're almost done Abraham, but we've been spending a lot of time on Abraham, and that's for a reason, because fundamentally Abraham is the start of our faith. The faith of Abraham is what our salvation is based around. The promises made to Abraham is what we are baptized into and what we hope to also inherit. So understanding Abraham and getting Abraham kind of down and knowing where Abraham is and what Abraham is all about is fundamental to Christian belief. So super important that we cover him in depth and understand all about Abraham. So we've got another journey going on here. Abraham is kind of hanging out in this area here in Hebron, or is also known as Mamre. At that time. In your notes, we're on page 41. So yeah, the slide was wrong there. It should have said section 14 for rods. And then I'm on section 15 on page 41 in our notes, Abraham's journey and the promised son. So we actually get the promised son born this evening. So he's there in Hebron, and then he takes this journey. Oh, it's supposed to show, did it show up there? There it is, it did show up. I thought there was a line. There was a line. There it is. Now it did work. I thought there was something going on there. Skipped ahead on mine. Oh, we got that up there on my screen. Well, I guess you guys get to see that. The people in my house get to see some extra Zoom little things on the top of their screen. Sorry about that. So this is where we are. Now they've got Sodom and Gomorrah down here. We don't actually think that's actually where Sodom and Gomorrah were. Most likely Sodom and Gomorrah were up at the top here of the Dead Sea. From archaeological evidence, it looks like they found some ruins up at the top here that most likely were Sodom and Gomorrah. But regardless, it's over on this kind of side. Abraham's up here on the hill country, and then he takes this journey down to Gerar in Genesis chapter 20. So reading Genesis 20 verses 1 and 2. And Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So we have this difficulty of Abraham, and he hasn't learned his lesson. I don't know if you remember back in Genesis chapter 12, he did the same thing when they went down into Egypt. He went down to Egypt and he's like, oh, he's kind of afraid of the people of the land. And he's like, oh no, just say that you're my sister, so that people won't kill me and take you. Well, they still take Sarah away from Abraham, but he still hasn't quite got this whole trusting in the Lord, and that's a big lesson that we got here, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But interesting that she is actually Abraham's sister, his half sister, same father, different mothers. So technically, when he says, "Oh, she's my sister," technically he is saying what is accurate, but not saying the whole truth, right? That she is actually his wife as well. Now, interesting, marrying your sister. Quick little digression on this. This was actually, if you are doing your Bible readings in the daily Bible reading planner that I think is in, did we give it to you in your notes in this one as well? Is it at the back? I know we gave it in the Learn to Read the Bible Effectively. Oh, no, it's in your notes. So at the back of your notes, if you are following through on your daily Bible reading planner that we've given you about a week ago, we were reading in Leviticus, and it says in Leviticus chapter 18, "The nakedness of thy sister, the daughter of thy father or the daughter of thy mother, whether she be born at home or born abroad, even their nakedness thou shalt not uncover." So in the law of Moses, it clearly states that you were not supposed to marry your sister, right? That you were not supposed to have relations with your sister. So what do we make of this then? Well, I guess the first thing we have to remember is that Abraham is a long time before the law. The law of Moses hadn't actually been given yet, right? It's at least another 500 years, probably 400 years, about 500 years before the law of Moses is even given. So this is a long time before that. So this law hadn't actually been given yet. The other thing to remember, people like Abel, Cain, and Seth would have all had to marry their sisters. right? There was no other people around. Adam and Eve were the only parents, and their offspring were the only people around. Those would have been the only females. So these gentlemen here would have had to have married their sister in order for the race to populate, for humans to continue on. So really, the genetic defects make it unwise to marry a close relatives, as they can be passed on to the children. This would not have been a problem for the genetically pure humans close to creation. Uh-oh. Got a phone call, actually. Oh, man. Sorry. So this is really the reason why it is given at this point in the law of Moses, where God's like, hey, this is not a good idea. You shouldn't be marrying your sister. If there are any sort of genetic defects, they're going to be amplified and passed on to the offspring. Back at the creation, where the humans were still very genetically pure, it wouldn't have been an issue, right? Those defects wouldn't have been passed along. So marrying your sister at that point wasn't a big deal, and it wasn't outlawed by God at that point. So just a quick little digression on there, that this was okay for Abraham to do. It was okay for the people before the law to do. And eventually God, for our own good, says, hey, this is probably not a good idea to do this anymore because of the impacts that it can have on the offspring. So that was just that quick digression here. But why do we have this twice brought up, that Abraham doesn't quite trust the Lord, right? He doesn't quite say, hey, I completely trust that God has promised that I would have a seed through Sarah, that God said he would protect me and look after me. No, he has to kind of take this in his own kind of hands and say, no, I've got to try and make the people think that she's my sister, not my wife, and to protect myself. Now, the question we ask is, why is this being recorded? Is this to put Abraham in a bad light? Is it just to kind of be like, oh yeah, Abraham wasn't such a good guy at all? Well, really the answer is no. It is so that we might learn lessons from Abraham's life. And this is really the lesson of all of the people in the scriptures, even the bad ones and the good ones. It's not there just to be like, oh yeah, that was a really bad guy there. It's all about so that we can learn from either their successes or their mistakes. And the reference that we've got here is 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, saying that all scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable. Why is it profitable? Well, it's profitable for doctrine. It tells us what we should believe, for reproof, for correction, so we can figure out what we're doing wrong, and then we can change our ways, and to instruct us in righteousness, so that we can be right in God's eyes, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works, right? So we're here to learn a lesson from Abraham's life and from all of these characters' life as we read our Bible. Super important. Whenever you're reading your Bible, find the lesson. Why did God write this? What should I be learning? What should I be understanding? How should I change my behavior? If God's like, hey, this is a really great thing, okay, maybe I should do more of that. Or, ooh, Lot moved down into Sodom, and look what happened from that. Maybe I should learn the lesson from that, right? And we try and figure out what God is trying to teach us from these things. So here again, we have this lesson of Abraham comes up twice. So obviously it's important. And as Bill was saying there at the beginning, just briefly, right? This reference in Psalm 34, which we always need to remember, the angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. God has promised that he will look after us and he will be there for us. And it's our job to try and remember that. When things are tough, when things are not going well, or we find ourselves maybe in a difficult situation, always relying on God's protection and God's ways, and that's how we act and behave ourselves at that point, will help us to act accordingly to what God has said, and hopefully not to make any sort of these mistakes. So Abimelech's house at this point, when he takes Sarah, has been the wombs of all the women have been shut up. Verse, what do we have here? We have verse 3 and verse 6. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said unto him, indeed, you are a dead man, because the woman whom thou hast taken, she is a man's wife. And then jumping to 6, and God said unto him in the dream, yes, I know that you did it in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. And then when we jump down to the end, verses 17 and 18 of this little story. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. For the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting story. And yeah, but again, what's the lesson? What is the principle? What are we actually trying to be taught here from this story? And I think that a big one of the big major lessons is that God is active in our lives. And we see this constantly in Lot's life and in Abraham's life. And even here in this Abimelech's life, God is actively working and doing things through his angels and through his power that he is active in our lives. So we have to be looking for and paying attention and seeing God actively in our lives and hopefully directing and guiding us and teaching us as we try and live our lives as best as we are able to in accordance to his word. So really important that we look for God to be in our lives, acting and working with us as we see it here in this story of Abraham. So that's there's that little digression in chapter 20, this little story that we've got there. When we get into chapter 21, we have again talking about the birth of Isaac. And particularly, let's read the first couple of verses in Genesis chapter 21, when we actually get the birth. Verse 1 of chapter 21, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Okay, another super important principle, God always keeps his promises. What God has said will come to pass, right? So God had said that Abraham is going to have a son through Sarah. If we jump back to Genesis 15, I don't know if you can remember that, right? Where this is Abraham's like, oh, how am I going to have a son? Is Eliezer, this Eliezer of Damascus, who is my chief kind of servant, my general manager, is he going to be the one who inherits kind of all of this stuff? God's like, no. 15 verses 2-5. But Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abraham said, look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come out of your own body shall be your heir. Okay, so God's like, no, it's going to come from you. It's not going to be this one born in your house, not going to be one of your servants. It's actually going to be your offspring. Okay, so Abraham does have a son, and he has Ishmael. Is that the one who's actually going to be the heir? Well, God says, no, it's actually going to be from Sarah. Verse 18 of chapter 17, and Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Then God said, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. Okay, so it's God twice there, right? Oh, no, it's not Eliezer. No, it's not Ishmael. Yes, it is going to be through Sarah and you. That is where the promised seed is going to come from. So we can be assured that if God says it in the Bible, it is going to happen exactly how God said it is going to happen. Sometimes we don't completely understand it or maybe get it wrong. But often when we look back with 2020 hindsight, we can see how it all worked out, exactly how God wanted it to work out. All right, and then jumping back into chapter 21, we see the son is finally born, that it is finally there, that they get the promised son. They've been waiting so long, right? 100 years old when Isaac is finally born. Abraham was approximately 75 years old when he leaves Ur. And when God says, get out, and then the son is finally born 25 years later. All right, Isaac means happiness or joy or laughter, as Rod was saying there. And wouldn't that be just so incredible to have this, to finally come beyond human capabilities and comprehension, that the son is finally born to the one who is 100 years old. So in this son, they saw the fulfillment of all their hopes, and in a couple of things, and not just in that, oh, yay, we have a son and we have an heir and we have our line to continue on, right? As a father, you always want to pass on your name, right? And it continues on. Well, this was more than just that. It was more than just the family line continued on. They were looking for the seed. All right, and we've stressed this also throughout this line, the line of the seed of the woman, the blue line, right, that runs all the way through scriptures that we see here. That's what they are, first of all, looking for fulfillment in. Okay, this one who would come and conquer the seed of the serpent, who would come and bruise the head of the serpent, would crush the head of the serpent, would be able to conquer sin and free us from death. Okay, so that's ultimately what they are looking for, and that's why they're so happy with this. They go, oh, excellent, we've got the promised seed. All right, ultimately it wasn't the promised seed, but it was the one who would continue that line from Genesis chapter 3. And then the other thing that they're looking for is the one whom God said all nations would be blessed. Remember when we go back to the first promises that Abraham was given in Genesis chapter 3, they would have been looking for this in Genesis 3. And I will bless those who bless you and curse him who curses you, and in you all families of the earth shall be blessed. So they are looking for this one who all families of the earth would be blessed. Yeah, so this is why they are so happy and so excited about this. These promises that had been given, they knew that they had to be fulfilled. And they are finally fulfilled in Isaac, and they are super happy about that. Josiah, can I have a glass of water, please? Sorry, need some water. Okay, so the son is born, and it's wonderful, and they're super happy, right? Isn't every mother so excited when they have their firstborn? It's after maybe the third or the fourth one, maybe it's not so exciting. No, I'm just kidding. It's still so exciting after each one that comes along. But that firstborn, right? And even at 90 years old, right? Just incredible. They would have been so happy and so excited that the new mother, and it just been wonderful. Well, not everything is hunky-dory in the family. And Pete, I think, talked about this the other day, kind of stole the thunder a little bit, but that's okay, into this conflict that happens. Because remember, we still have Ishmael, who was the older firstborn of Abraham through Hagar. So in Genesis chapter 21, as the story progresses, and the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham mocking. All right, so exactly what this is, not exactly sure, but in some capacity, Ishmael is making fun of Isaac. Now, I think this is a little bit more than just sibling rivalry, right? I think this has got to be a little bit more than just that. There's got to be something in here that is pretty serious, because we can see Sarah's reaction when this happens. As we continue to read down, wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a great nation, because he is of thy seed, as we jump down there a little bit. All right, so there's this conflict going on here, and Sarah's like, no, I'm not having this in my household. I will not have the seed of the bondwoman making fun of, suppressing, putting down, mocking the seed, the promised seed. Abraham's not super happy about this. And I think it was interesting that Rod read that verse, that Abraham, God was pleased with Abraham because he said he would instruct his children in his ways. And I'm sure that Abraham would have instructed Ishmael. He would have told Ishmael about the promises. He would have talked about Genesis 3, verse 15, right? And the promises of the seed and the inheritance and the wonderful things that God had laid out for them. And and I think that Ishmael had a certain amount of faith and knew the true God and believed in the true God. So Abraham is not happy about this. This is not a good thing in Abraham's eyes. But God's like, yes, we do need to, Ishmael does need to be removed from the scene. And we'll talk about exactly this kind of lesson that goes on here. So Abraham does expel Hagar and Ishmael from his house, and they are removed and they are taken out of the way for this. Verse 14. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulders, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. All right, so she is removed, is kicked out. Now Beersheba is a little bit farther down in the south. This map, this is, you can't really see it too well, but this is the Dead Sea right here. Here's Hebron, where Abraham was. Here's Gerar, where he was camping, and where the thing happened with Sarah. And so she kind of goes down here and kind of wanders around in this area down there. Well, she runs into a little bit of trouble in verses 15. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat down opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. So things are not going very well. She's struggling, no water. They're out in the wilderness. Now, this is, I think, is really interesting and speaks volume actually of Ishmael. Verse 17, and God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. All right, so God hears our prayers. He hears us and responds and looks after. Ishmael is still a son of Abraham, and he is promised that he would also be a great nation. So God looks after Ishmael and Hagar, and they are looked after, and God provides them water, and he also becomes a great nation in verse 18. We see that on the slide there, verse 20 and 21, and God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer, and he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so we see that he is looked after, that the seed of Abraham is looked after just as God had promised them. Now, we have here this two seeds, and this becomes a very important spiritual principle throughout the rest of the Bible, where we have the natural seed and we have the spiritual seed. And this again goes right back to the Garden of Eden as well. We have the seed of the woman and we have the seed of the serpent. And again, we are trying to follow on that blue line, that though we might not be a natural seed of Abraham, we can become the spiritual seed of Abraham that we've got there. And I think this is also in our notes, if I remember correctly. Just going back 42. Yeah. So we've got this in on page 42. You can read through there as well, through those through what we're kind of going to cover right now. One of the references that we've got there is in Galatians chapter 4. Now we, brethren, as Isaac's was, are children of promise, right? Paul is speaking to Jews, people who are literally descended from Abraham. Right? They were the children of promise. They were Jews. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. So just like Ishmael mocked and persecuted and made fun of Isaac, who was born after the spirit, who was the son of promise, who was not a natural, right? That wasn't natural at 190 years old. That's not a natural birth. That's a birth of promise, or of spiritual birth. So we can see that Ishmael was mocking, was persecuting the spiritual son. And Paul says that's just like it's happening now. Those people who have been baptized into Jesus, who are not not natural Jews, but were spiritual Jews, were being persecuted by the natural Jews at that time. Verse 30, nevertheless, what saith the scriptures? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. So that's the principle that comes down here. And that's why Ishmael had to be removed, because it's not based on just who your parents are. That's not what it's all about. We want to be the children of promise, not just of natural birth. That doesn't mean just because you are a Jew doesn't mean that you can't be a part of the promises and you can't be an heir. But that's not exclusively what it's about. It's about those of us who choose to be baptized into Abraham's family, so that everybody can have an opportunity to be part of Abraham's family through faith and baptism. Now, I think we have brought up Galatians 3, verses 26 to 29 many times, and we'll bring it up time and time again, because that is the foundation principle of our hope. If we want to, the hope that we bear is the hope of Abraham. It says we are heirs according to the promise to Abraham. What was Abraham promised? Abraham was promised the land of Israel, the land that he walked on forever. And that's what we are promised. We are not promised to go to heaven. That's not the promise that God has given us. God has said, you are going to dwell on this earth. That's what he told Abraham. He said, Abraham, this is what you're going to get forever. This is what I'm promising you. And when we are baptized, that's what we are looking to inherit. So super important that we understand the promises to Abraham. We understand where Abraham was coming from, that we accept those promises, and that we can become a child, the spiritual child, the spiritual children of Israel, and we can be adopted into that family and inherit the promises that God gave to Abraham and that come down to us as well. All right, so we got Isaac now, and now the story is going to start to shift into Isaac and then down into Jacob and following that family down throughout the rest of Genesis.